Alrighty, let's get started about a patient summary FHIR IG call. I may actually have the wrong thing open. I now see that that says Thursday. Let's see what I've actually done. Is this actually the Thursday one? It is. All right, let me just bring up the one for today instead of yesterday's slide pack. I've closed the wrong file. Let's go find that. Meetings 2026. Today's the 20th of February. All right, I've found that. I'll start sharing screen again. Where's the share button? There it is. Okay, this is the right thing. Perfect. Okay. Let me know. Can people see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, we can,
Excellent.
but not in presentate one now it is. Yeah.
Alrighty. So I will now go through our actual patient summary, which also starts with an acknowledgement of country, in which we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all gather today, which for me is the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And we acknowledge the First Peoples as the first scientists, educators, and healers. Today's agenda is super jam-packed, so some things are already kind of postponed. Um, We'll go through usual business that we always do. We'll try to keep that short. A little bit of a ballot update because ballot's open today. Yay, we're there. We need to start doing updates on it. I'm going to start going through a bit of ballot 101 because the ballot period is open. So those people who have signed up, and even those people who haven't signed up, but have a vested interest in patient summary. We've all got roles that we can play in that, and I want to run through that. We'll continue that into the next call. I'm going to postpone walking through the actual snapshot that we published for ballot around. There are several requests for community feedback. Some came out from our last call around it was like, what does my support mean for elements with multiple cardinality? We agreed that a next step in our last call was to actually put out a request for feedback in the IG. We've done that. There's a number of other things where we've made a similar decision where we're looking for further feedback from the community. It might be next call where we bring those up and we talk about like a plan for action. How are we actually going to work through and resolve those? Similarly, going through some of the automated QA validation and what the results are, and whether or not we're happy with that, that's going to be postponed because um, coming out of the AU Core Technical Design Group yesterday, it's the right time to revisit the decision that we had talked about how we represent no-known meds. And so we've got a portion of that there. And then there's also talking through some of the Connectathon content because this I think is the last call before the Connectathon. Maybe it's not, I don't know, but it's feeding into it before we like talk about what's next. Now, does anyone have anything they want to add to this agenda? All right, I'm not hearing anything. If you do, just pop your hand up at whatever point in time, and we'll either add it to this one if we can fit it in today, or schedule it for the next call. All right, so let's go through usual business as quickly as we can. There's minutes they've been sent round for review. I'm just going to bring those up now. So we've got minutes from our last call. We've got agenda, we've got attendees, all the usual kind of content we need, the decisions we made, like approval of the previous minutes. Um, and we went through and we talked a great deal about a couple of things that have Well, we didn't get to a position on that. That's why we've agreed to put the request for feedback into the IG. So what's been included in the minutes is a very detailed kind of more transcript form so that we can capture the discussion that was had on the day, and the set of actions. Does anyone need more time to review these minutes before we look to approve? All right, I'm not hearing anyone, so I'm going to ask who's happy to motion approval of the minutes of the last call.
Make a motion, Jai.
Thanks, Jai. Who's happy to second?
Hmm.
Sorry, if someone was speaking there, I didn't hear you.
I'm happy to second, Ricardo.
Thanks, Ricardo. So we have Jai motioning, Ricardo seconding. I'll just put up the poll for approval
Hmm.
of the previous minutes. You should see that in front of you now. If you could vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. If you don't have access to it or can't even see the poll, but you can see the chat, can you put in the chat a +1 for affirmative, negative, or abstain? And if you've dialed in through your mobile phone or however that's working, if you could say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. So just looking at that, we've got 80% of people voted. So we're just looking for a few more people who haven't clicked an option yet or put something in the chat.
Hmm.
Just waiting on a couple more people. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I will share the results. And I'll just double check the chat. Okay, nobody's voted in the chat. So that leaves us with 11 affirmative, 0 negative, 14 abstain. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's get back to this. So we've got actions. There are two actions, and they're on me. Um, so the top one was to include a request for feedback on the meaning of obligation in the version of the patient summary that is going for ballot. That has been done. And we'll run through it in the next call rather than this one. But that is actually out there and in
Hmm.
what is available right now. The next one is on me and Brendan, actually, although that doesn't list Brendan. So that's on me and Brendan to have a think about how we can bring to this group an exploration of what this might be in order to support like patient IPS through, I think, really an Olympic scenario. Is that about right, Brendan? Just
Uh,
checking.
yeah, I sorry, I hadn't realised we had an action, but yeah, that is a scenario that is coming up rapidly for Queensland.
Yep, so I'll get in contact with you and have a chat about how we can use this kind of forum to explore what that might mean, and how we can look to support that within Australia.
Thank you. Yeah, you've my
Nick.
contacts.
Yep, awesome. Update. So the ballot snapshot is released. That got published. That got published on Monday. So that's out there and available. This is everything that we have agreed, basically, will is relevant for patient summary R1. This is our proposal to the wider community to say that we think this is the standard for R1 for patient summary. And so we are asking people to review and provide feedback.
Hmm.
Does include, as we talked about, there are some requests for feedback. You can see that here. There's a little request for feedback. I won't go into detail now, but this is what we agreed in our previous call to put out a call for people who are balloting this, ballot voters, and people who are reviewing it while it's open in ballot to provide some feedback on this to see if we can actually form an agreed position. So there's a few of these out there. I don't think there are any other updates and news, but I'll just ask, I guess, the wider group if there's anything else that they wanted to highlight at this point. Tony.
Yeah. Excuse me. It's two things, I guess. One, I put some feedback in quite some time ago, but unfortunately I missed the ballot entry. And that is that none of these summaries include what the patient's nutrition or diet is, because that is becoming increasingly important, particularly because we have the up and coming new dietary guidelines for Australia. And we also have recently the US new guidelines. And the fact that nutrition, diet affects not only our health, but it interacts with medication. And that's why I've also written how you define medications, because there's a whole lot of stuff there which can include food in medications. If you have a thyroid condition, you take thyroxine. If you take that with food, it affects the efficacy of the thyroxine. Similarly, this may be the old hat now, but with warfarin, anticoagulant, if you took broccoli and such foods with it, it affects the warfarin the doses. So yeah, I guess that's my two comments.
So I think, because I don't think that's come through to the fire in specific, but it sounds to me like the feedback that you've provided would have come through to the clinical design group and onto the AU CDI exploration of what is the kind of information, the MVP, if you will, for patient summary from a clinical perspective. Um, I'm just scanning who's joined us, and we usually have an AUCDI editor representative, but I don't think we have one today. Um, so we can pick that up maybe in next call to see where that feedback has landed and what that might mean coming in through our first exploration through the clinical design group into the modeling of AUCDI and then into patient summary. Um, but I think you might have provided that through. I think there might have been something that came out for draft for comment, like AUCDI came out for draft for comment, as opposed to raising maybe a change request in Jira. Would that be about right?
I'm not sure.
Because I would hate for us to miss it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where it ended up. That's why I'm asking,
Oh.
because I had specifically asked for it in both summary
Yeah.
and for clinical. Um,
So I think we should follow that up. I'll take an action also to follow that up. I believe that I've seen your comments, not that I knew they were yours, forming part of a backlog of consideration for the future work around patient summary, and that I wasn't in all the meetings, but I think that it has not formed like the initial MVP of patient summary from the clinical group. But I think it's on the backlog for prioritization for the work they're going to continue on with.
right. Thank you.
But I'll get an update from them and we can report back to this group on where that's at.
I've also just dropped in a link to the AUCI
Yep.
R3 community comment path. So there's information on the website around the current version and the ability to provide feedback on that. But if there's any broader questions, there's also the email address for the Spark team at SARA, which you can reach out to as well.
Okay, thanks, Jai. I see that you've put that in the comments, sorry, in the chat as well, where people can see that. And we don't have a link to the backlog, but I know there is a publicly available list of items that were considered relevant, but didn't make it into the first release of the work the clinical design group did around patient summary. So we might see if I can find that link and then I can also report back on that in our next call so that we can see that and find out also from the AUCDI folks when they're considering extending that work. Oh, the link has just popped up. Thank you very much. We've got a link now in the chat to the backlog for AUCDI. So I think we need to ensure that that's there. And we can also find out when the work is planned to be done around extending the clinical modeling around what's necessary to support that. That would then form the clinical requirements that come into this group to consider how do we support that clinical data in an exchange in a FHIR technical standard. Awesome. All of that's in there. Oh, fantastic. Thanks, Jai. Thanks, Maddie. Wonderful. That's in the chat. All right. Um, okay. The other thing I wanted to highlight for people are that we have a number of Zulip polls. Uh, if you've signed up to the patient summary group, you'll have got some sort of welcome email that would have said, please join the following things. I cannot stress how important enough it is that you can access Zulip from this perspective. What we have continuously are these kinds of questions that are available on things that will impact us. Um, I'm just going to highlight a few. So there's work that's being considered in the latest tranche of work around AU Core for a diagnostic report resource. That would trigger an AU patient summary profile that, according to our principles, will pick up all the modeling there. So I would encourage people who care about patient summary and also care about the diagnostic results section to consider providing their input into this really quick kind of Zulip poll. There's also um, this one on use of identifier type. So there's a bunch of work being done by the agency to support Health Connect Australia, so HCA project, that is looking at supporting two new types of identifiers that we don't actually have yet in practice, but that are being developed. These are for organizations, we think. And part of that work is looking at how we adequately support the use cases for use of identifiers. Um, so again, if your system is or has implemented identifiers, please consider contributing to this so that we can ensure that the discussions that we have on that actually reflect that usage. And I think there's one more, and this is a fascinating discussion going on at the IPS level. This will have come through, I think, in a link from me, but if not, I'll send it through via email. In IPS, there's been a recent move in international to look at the use of allowing grouping of subsections. So in patient summaries at the moment, it's pretty much a flat list in IPS. You have meds and allergies and problems and procedures and things around patient story and so forth. And it's prohibited in the IPS specification to support subsections of that. Part of that is for an international interoperability perspective, is the thought. But a recent request has come in from a number of different projects going on in the US that I think are looking to move from what is CCDA into an IPS conformant format that are raising what they're pushing as a need from their perspective to allow for finer grained hierarchy of different sections. And so there's a poll out now to understand in terms of FHIR documents who is actually doing this now. It's as simple as that. If you deal with compositions or bundles of FHIR document, there is a poll out to ask, do you actually implement section dot section? And that's going to start to feed into conversations that will come back into this group as we try to build out our patient summary, which is a FHIR document and remains harmonized with all the work in international, which includes the work that is going on in Europe and in Canada, and the US has just started a patient summary project as well. So, bunch of different polls. They won't take much time to fill out. Please consider contributing to those so we can keep the conversation moving forwards, basically. All right, I'm going to move on from that. let me just get to the next bit. I think there's still a couple of tickets left for the Connectathon. So if you are able to come and interested to come on Sydney, we've got the QR code there. There's a couple of tickets left and you can snab all those. Conversely, if you had got your tickets, but it turns out you're not able to attend, please email HL7 AU to let people know so they can provide those tickets to others if necessary. All right, let's move on. Okay, so we're past the usual business and onto ballot updates. So in terms of the AU TDG, which has been the collective group that we're in, there's only one project going to ballot, which is AU Patient Summary. That's out, that's available. We're going to ballot. We've finished our development work, or so you might think. Okay, I'm going to put this graphic up for you. You're going to see this for the next few months. This is tracking through how we're doing about our ballot process. So ballot sign up is now closed. Um, and what we have registered are 57 voters. I haven't got quite the stats yet from HL7AU on how many different organisations and how many different individual members. I'll update that and provide it. But right now we know there are 57 who have voted. Our ballot period as of today is open. People can register your vote. If you have signed up to be a ballot voter, you can now start voting as of today. I've got to do that later today. I've not done it yet. That's open for a month. And then we were in reconciliation period. Our target for publication is still in July, preferably earlier in July, but mid-July is roughly our target. And we'll need to work through the feedback in what will be the new work group. I know I kind of highlighted that in the last call that there will be an AU core work group as opposed to a TDG that will come into effect soon. That shouldn't affect the project too much, but that might be a topic on our next call to talk about how we will continue operationally as Patient Summary. So here's roughly our reconciliation schedule. This is just a pretty graphic of what is in the HL7AU FHIR calendar. During the ballot period, we have a connectathon, so there'll be a lot of ask for people in terms of test scenarios to be testing out what we've said. Hey, we think this is correct. This is the patient summary R1. We're going to test that in the connectathon. We might get feedback out of that. We might get feedback from international. We might get feedback locally, and then we're going to work through this period, any of that feedback to go through it and consider what changes, if any, we make before we publish the first release of Patient Summary. This is our rough kind of timeline. We'll come back to that when we have a better perspective of the feedback that's coming through. So, one of the things I wanted to do today, but we don't have heaps of time, so I'm going to spend maybe 30 minutes on it, is talking about Ballot 101. And I need to do that because Ballot is open today. Our next call will go through whatever I don't get to today, but we're going to kind of cut this short to allow us to talk about no known meds and the updates on that and the decision that's going to be put before this group. So, balloting. HL7AU, we have a standards process. And balloting is made up currently of these kinds of documents. There's also, because there's a HL7 Australia set of processes that are being developed right now that will kind of change this, but they will be a localization of HL7 International's governance and operational manual. There's one available on the website. I can see that I haven't linked it, and I should have swapped out that link, apologies, that governs how does balloting work. We've got a process local in Australia that is a Confluence document that talks about balloting process. How does even a group trigger that they want to go to ballot, which we have. We've said, hey, we'd like to go to ballot. We're in it. And all our decisions that come through ballot feedback happen the same way we've made all decisions. They're no different than anything else. Every decision goes through decision-making practices. There's HL7AU decision-making practices. That's that majority. It's Robert's rules. We have movers, seconders, majority voting, and we avoid preponderance of influence. All of that continues to happen for every single thing that comes through. And there's bylaws from HL7 Australia that govern um, who can vote, like who's eligible to vote, which we already know by now because we've had the voting sign-up period. I just wanted to go through briefly ballot for working standard because we did it for comment, and it is quite distinct. The ballot for comment was about really presenting an early draft to show a direction that we were going in for both international and local, and putting that out and really trying to drive feedback that would enable us to adjust course, and work through any major kind of items and minor items before we thought that we were done. By the time we go for ballot for working standard, we think we're done. In terms of this group, we think we have completed a appropriate first release patient summary, and so a ballot for working standard is used to evaluate this content. It might not be normative or bound now, but it would be appropriate for any kind of mandates that might come in later. And we call it a working standard rather than normative because there's an expectation this might change. So there's a maturing kind of spectrum within HL7AU and international, that there's a recognition that there needs to be a period of this being exercised in the real world and an ability to fold that in, all those changes into future releases before we want to lock things down into some kind of normative cannot change perspective. So what we're going out for in terms of a working standard is say, we think this is production system ready, but we recognize that we don't know all the answers yet. And future releases will work through those before we can hit something that we think is frozen normative done. So we're therefore soliciting review. Out of this, which will have the consensus body that forms and votes. That's that voting sign up where HL7 Australia has formed a voting body to evaluate the standard and then vote on whether or not they think they approve it to be published as is or with minor changes, or whether or not they are not happy for publication to proceed. And there would be feedback associated with why they don't think that publication could proceed of the standard. And of course, you can have absent. If we pass, that gives us the authorization to publish. I will say now that every piece of feedback that comes in, even if we have the authorization to publish, we need to examine in this group for whether or not we feel that we should address that. Obviously, there's a bit more emphasis if we don't pass the approval rating to publish. That may trigger things like a later ballot if there's major rework to be done. But every single piece of feedback that gets voted on, whether we have the tick to publish or not, we will work through in this group. So here's our scope. It is exactly the same scope that we've kind of been looking at for a while. Same profiles, we've not added any others, same kind of content on the right. I'm not going to go into too much detail because we've seen this diagram a few times before on what are the profiles that are actually in the AU Patient Summary FHIR IG, which you can actually see by looking at the FHIR IG. But we have all content we'd plan to in ballot. So this is just a tick. Our scope is actually out there and available for review. I wanted to talk briefly, because ballot is open now, about this, overall versus individual. So for every person who is eligible, in which you have to be basically a HL7AU member, either you're an individual voter or you are one of the voters that corresponds to a organizational member. So, for example, I am a voter and I am a voter under the banner of CSIRO. So CSIRO is an organizational member. It's allowed 9 individual voters as part of CSIRO's membership level, and I am one of those. When I'm voting, I have 2 options. I can essentially just vote overall, as in I can just say approve, no further changes, done, I'm happy, just please approve it. I can also abstain at an overall level and say I don't feel that I can sufficiently make a decision on whether or not I can approve this or not. If I choose to have a negative vote, as in I do not approve the publication of this as a working standard, even with looking at my feedback. I would like to block the publication of this. I would vote negative. And if you vote negative, you must list, and this is this bit on individual jurors, you must say what. You have to provide the specifics on what it is that has to be addressed before you would move to like approve the publication of the specification. In addition to what I've talked about, and guys, if you've got any questions, like you're a voter and you're listening to this and going, oh, I don't get it, please put your hand up. You can vote anyway on individual jurors. So you can vote approve, but also say, I mean, I approve the publication of this specification, but I do also think the following things need to be looked at, need to be addressed. So you can do both of those things. So there is a overall vote, and there is voting on individual jurors. A positive vote on a juror says, I'm still happy for publication of the spec, but I want you to look at these particular things and consider changing them. A negative vote says, the thing I voted negative on is sufficient, in my opinion, to block publication. So preferably, we wouldn't expect typos, like commas, to be a negative block. That would be more like a positive, if you will. Like, please make sure this is editorially correct, but I don't think we have to hold up the entire thing just because I've spotted some punctuation. Typically. That's up to you as a voter to make that decision on where you think that lands. We will get that information in these calls on what feedback has come through and whether people have voted positive or negative on it as part of the information for us to consider how we triage and deal with it. The other thing that's important to note, if you are a stakeholder and you are interested in this, but you are not eligible to vote, but you have feedback, raise your feedback. Voting doesn't happen in terms of like individual, I think this is an issue or not, doesn't just happen on the feedback people raise. They would look at the backlog and go, oh, okay, I can see that issue that Danielle has raised, and I agree, that's significant. So I'm going to vote negative on that issue that Danielle raised. So I encourage everybody, whether you're a voter or not, to review the patient summary specification we've put out for working standard and to raise any feedback that you think that we should be considering in this first release. And then everything, will go through and be available for the people who are voting to get a picture of the open kind of feedback items. All right, just looking at time. This is the overall stuff. I might revisit that when the vote closes because I think I just talked about that. Everyone who's eligible should have received an email from, I think, HR7AU now. You will have been assigned a no vote. That's not negative. That's a I've not yet voted. You actually have to go in and log into the system and record your actual vote to turn a no vote into something else. In terms of passing, and we need 60% affirmative to pass. No votes and abstains do not count. The can we pass the approval to publish only gets counted out of affirmative and negative. Um, so for a number of reasons, sometimes it's because people have left the organization they signed up with. There's always a certain small percentage of no votes. People who've signed up but were unable to provide their vote. Abstain, I think this is actually a good description. Abstain is usually where, I mean, you've logged in, you are recording a vote, but oops, go back. For whatever reason, the voter has said that they're unable to provide what they think is a meaningful approve or negative, and so they're abstaining. Affirmative is that you are happy for this to proceed to publication. And again, you might have minor changes. You've raised that, you've voted on feedback. They will all be addressed before publication, but you are otherwise happy for the specification to proceed to publication. Negative is where there is at least one issue that you think is of such a significant nature that if not addressed in what you've raised, you would not be happy for this to proceed to publication. There's an example from HL7 International, like significant design changes, for example. Any questions on kind of the overall voting so far? All right, we'll move on. Pass or fail. So here's what we need. 60%. We need 60% of affirmative and negative. I'll move on this pretty quickly. We'll track that and report it in each of our calls around where we're sitting in terms of pass rates and so forth. Okay, let's talk about feedback people can provide. This is whether you are a ballot voter or just anybody on the call. You can raise feedback. You can raise one of these four things. You can raise a change request, which is an actual change to the specification, normative or informative, where you can say, I want a totally new thing. I want to change something that exists, or I think I want to take something out. You can do all of that. A technical correction is like an obvious defect. Like there's a bug. There's some kind of like typo or an actual like defect in FHIR path or something like that. That's not a change request. That's reporting, well, it's reporting a defect. And it's an important distinction because you don't have to vote if you're a balloter on technical corrections. Technical corrections are always prioritized because they are about defects in the specification. So if you find one at any point in time, raise it as a technical correction. That will be assessed by the experts. If it is indeed clearly an obvious defect, it will just be fixed. If on assessment, it's like, well, I mean, we could make a choice here, it's going to get converted to a change request. All change requests come through these calls, as in every single thing that is an improvement or an enhancement or some other change will come through these calls for us to say, well, will we fix it in R1? Does this form our backlog? Or actually, do we think that this isn't actually appropriate for patient summary? In which case we'll say, no, we don't agree. The last two, which as far as I know, the tooling still allows you to vote on these if you're a ballot voter, but please don't. It causes problems. Is a question. You can raise questions via Jira. We don't recommend it in Australia. We recommend if you've got questions, either raising them in this group or using Zulip. But if you are looking for um, a formal, documented, trackable raising of a question, and then a formal, documented, trackable answer from the project, this is where you go to. I mean, obviously, there's some use cases there around maybe some governance documents from jurisdictions who might need to get like a formal response to something. that this might be your go-to. But if they're just actual, I just quickly want to know this, don't use Jira for that. Jira is your heavyweight kind of, I want a formal, trackable, documented thing. Because also you won't get a quick response, probably. Last bits of comments. Anyone can raise a comment at any time. It's used as a heart because comments are basically positive, like, I love that image. Great job on the spec. Well done harmonizing with IPS or other things that you want as a stakeholder recorded, that there are certain things that you are happy about. We have in Australia got them in the past from a number of multinational vendors about the work done in AU Core. Um, we do see them, but that's what comments are used for. Just be careful when when you're raising feedback to see if you get the right thing. There's a drop down basically where you select it. All right. I'm gonna move on past this one. Yeah, affirmative, negative. We talked about that. I talked about voting on feedback. Okay, I'm just going to hit this one and then we'll stop because I'll go into great detail when we've got some feedback so we can like run through it in practice on how will we apply the operational rules for how we deal with feedback in these committee calls. But I'm going to go overall. So here's the rough responsibilities. Balloters, that's the people who signed up to vote. It's their job in this 1 month period to review the spec and to vote. Vote affirmative, vote negative, abstain, and vote on any particular feedback. They might raise feedback or they might vote on ones that already exist. Co-chairs. This is also going to apply to the work group when it forms. It is the co-chair's sole job as administrative. They monitor the feedback that comes in. They do an initial triage of these. I'll talk about that in a sec. And they organise to ensure that responding to every single ballot comment raised is done. We've had records in the past where there's like been 199 pieces of feedback on a single ballot thing. And so the co-chairs can spend quite a bit of time like running through that and making sure that comes through this group appropriately. Point 3, I know that says TDG members. That'll soon shift to work group members. But the point is that the members, the people in this call, work on these resolutions. We will discuss every change request and decide if this is something that we should be working on. And if it is our responsibility as people who are part of this project to work on that. I will say the expectation is the person who raised the feedback is part of that. There is an expectation if you say this needs further work, that you are available to contribute to resolving that. Otherwise, potentially the work group will vote to defer because we don't have available the expertise to actually resolve it. After all of that's happened, so this is the first one's voting. 2 and 3 are let's triage and then actually work on resolving the ballot stuff. Once we've resolved everything, HL7AU will contact ballot voters to do something called withdraw votes. That's closing the loop, like someone's raised something, someone's responded, and then it comes back to the person who raised it to decide if they're satisfied. That's what's called withdraw in HL7. It's particularly important for negative voters, but also for positive, where if you're satisfied with the outcome of what you raised, you click a button and you say you withdraw, and that lets us know that you are happy with the outcome, basically. So it's closing the loop. And at the end of all of that, we confirm if we actually have passed and we have the remit to publish, or if we've done such significant rework or we didn't actually meet the pass rate that we will need to go into balloting again. That's probably less likely given the state of community feedback around AU PS, but it is always possible. Right, I'm just going to wrap up with co-chair triage. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. It is just grouping things together, like are they editorial or typographical? Are these questions? Are these actually in scope? So if we look at these things raised on patient summary, and this has happened in the past, might actually be on a core FHIR extension. Someone's like, that extension is modeled incorrectly. We can't do anything about that in patient summary. It's a core FHIR like standard extension. So that's kind of out of scope. We would instead actually suggest that the person who raised this provides feedback into the FHIR specification. Um, so that's one of the things the co-chairs do is go through and check whether or not the issue that's been surfaced in patient summary is something that we can solve in this group or if it actually needs to be solved somewhere else. I haven't listed this here, but it's also possible there may be some like board level or the new TSC or some other work group kind of decision. And then every now and then we get things coming into our spec from other stuff in ballot. I don't think that's going to happen this time, but it's possible. So, at the risk of boring people, I think I might stop there about some of what's going to happen in this ballot period that we're about to kick off into. I'll cover how do we deal with voting in our next call because I expect that we'll actually have something to go through and assess against. I will say that we do have, and I'll send an email about it. There's an area in Confluence, because Confluence is where we do all our project work, called ballot reconciliation, which for patient summary, and I didn't update it this morning, will be kept relatively up to date. So that will have like all the stats. It'll have like what votes are coming up when and more information here. If you want to track that, you can watch this page and see the updates that come from it. But they'll come into these fortnightly calls anyway. All right, I'm about to stop talking about ballot and then hand over to talk about no known meds. But before I do, are there any questions that people would like to ask now, given that ballot is open today? All right, I'm not hearing any. And you can ask them in the next call as well. So what I might do is hand over to Heath to take us through the update around the no known meds piece.
Thanks, Danielle. Okay, where am I? So you may remember on a previous patient summary call, we worked through a ballot reconciliation issue about no known medications, and that there was basically an inconsistency between or we wanted to refine the way that no known medications is represented in in AUPS compared to the current guidance in IPS. And so this was the issue that was raised as part of the previous draft ballot. And we resolved this by agreeing that we would use the medication statement profile only, and we would use the Australian no known current medicines coding for it because the one that's recommended by IPS internationally had been deactivated within the Australian SNOMED version. So I won't dwell on the rest of this too much, given that most people have the history on that. But part of the reason why the Australian SNOMED had deactivated the one that is used internationally was because of this ambiguity of the way it was modeled. You can see in the highlighted part there, it is talking about an unknown drug therapy finding. And although the concept is no known medications, we felt that that was it was felt some time ago, I think 2018, by the terminologists that that was not reflective of the intended concept of known known, and that unknown medications was very different to known known medications. So as I said, it was deactivated in Australia. So as part of the work that us reconciling this and taking this back up to IPS, etc., the Australian terminologists had raised a concern about it at SNOMED, and they remodeled the international concept. So you can see the new model, Danielle.
Do we want to, just before we get into this, because I think we do have a couple of new people on the line who weren't at that discussion. Do we want to show, I don't know if you have the hidden slide, because there was that good one yesterday of like the Zulip post and what's in to show the use case this is actually addressing.
I don't have that handy. Do you have the yesterday's slides handy that you
I
want to?
do. I can briefly share screen and then you can share screen again if you would like that approach.
Sure.
That would be
Otherwise, I've got to
great.
go
Thank
find
you.
my.
Let's, because we went through a lot of use case stuff the very first time we talked about it, and we had a number of clinical representatives. But it was a bit, I guess this is really the summary slide, if you want to talk to that one, Heath.
Yeah, so this is within IPS and AUPS when we've got an empty section for medications. There is recommendation in IPS to allow you to actually explicitly state that you are that there are no known medications rather than just basically saying this is an empty list. And this is to support those systems that actually do state this explicitly in their user interface. So you can see an example in the top right-hand corner and a similar one down in the bottom left-hand corner where they have these checkboxes. One's actually a hospital system, one's a primary care system, but basically the concept is the same. There's no medications that we're aware of. I'm explicitly stating that we do not know them. It's not just that we haven't asked what medications the person is on. So that's what we're trying to represent within a patient summary is this concept of known medications versus that it's just an empty list and we really don't know. Is that
So
any
let's
questions on
pause, I
that?
guess, for some questions about that. I guess some further framing of that is that we're an interoperability specification.
Hmm.
There's a number of reasons this question is asked, recorded in systems, and what we've been trying to agree on is how do we make sure systems can share that information that they've got captured. That's really what we're talking about is what is the right code for
And we've
that.
got similar concepts for the other two mandatory sections in at IPS and AUPS as well. We have the concept of no current problems, no known current problems, and there is a concept of no known allergies. So those two concepts are there for those other two sections. And we just felt that the modeling of this particular area wasn't quite right in the SNOMED code that represents this concept on the screen.
Hmm.
Even though the guidance internationally was to use that code.
Hmm.
And again, the concept of unknown medications versus no known medications is subtly different semantically.
Mm. All right,
So
I might, oh no, Tony, your hands up.
This goes into it further. Yesterday, you mentioned that medications, in fact, covered more than just what would be considered prescriptions. but to clinicians trained in hospital get very restrictive and reductive in their thinking. And because they're writing out prescriptions and such and ordering medications, they forget, they don't have that training to look at what about the supplements, the over-counter medications, the food, the diet the patient's on. So those things, the medication as a listing there, as a prompt, is insufficient. And I'm looking at
I know we've got Matt Cordell and Michael Osborne on the line. Matt Cordell, do you want to talk about some of the modeling within SNOMED and what I guess what the concept could mean within a particular system context use?
Sure. Yeah, I guess it's just saying what it says on the label, that it's just no known medications. I think what Tony's point there was, I guess, the context of which system it's being recorded in. Because I think the way that I understood what you were saying is a hospital clinician, when they say known, I guess that's the screenshot there saying known home medications.
And that's the
Maybe
hospital system. Yep.
Yeah. And because otherwise they would say within the hospital context. But yeah, it's not as explicit. It's very open-ended, any medications, and whether you include supplements and vitamins and any other over-the-counters that might be taken.
Yeah, we're trying to reduce error.
Yeah, and so the terminology is open on that. So I guess that's how
Yeah.
that's interpreted. Yeah.
I-
I'm not sure how we resolve
As
that
I say,
distinction where.
You have to think like a clinician and how they're trained to realise that it's all very well to have just that listing medication, but their biases in terms of training and everything they get from the food and the pharmaceutical industry puts them into, prescription first and everything else gets forgotten. Yes, the hospital pharmacist or the community pharmacist may be able to pick up on something and saying, oh, look, this medication can't be taken with food, or look, this is going to clash with these other medicines that you get over the counter. But unless you list it, unless the person is prompted to list these things, and it doesn't matter whether it's hospital, any clinical setting, because it's safety of the patient that matters.
And I know this is a cop-out, Tony, but that's a conversation that needs to be had within the CDG and your colleagues there. And you can see what this question that went out to, or poll went out to the tech, the system vendors. There's variation in the way and in the support for this concept in systems at the moment. But we certainly wanted to ensure that the standards were there for those systems that do have it, for exactly that reason. That at least the systems that are capturing this concept, it is being conveyed, and then there is actually some obligation on those that are actually consuming these IPS, on the fact that they actually have to consider the implications of receiving that value when they do get one from some system down upstream.
I'm going to go slightly further context because Pip's raised some good stuff, which is to a degree why we're even like laser focusing on this one. Because Pip's raised three things, and all three have been, I mean, they've definitely come through the clinical consumer feedback. And we're feeling relatively confident on the scenario that Pip's put in the chat in I and I. But it's this one in particular that we aren't confident on, that we're still like working through how do we say like that as opposed to everything else. So if we look at this section on, oops, that's the wrong page. Apologies. Let's talk about this. Okay, the actual example here is not meds, but it's that differentiation between all of these things. And we want systems, like, because systems are capturing different things. And we want to have a way that when I want to share information between one system and another, we're faithfully sharing what that system has. And so in this case, it is like no known medications, as opposed to saying we don't have any data about meds at all, as opposed to saying we've not asked, as opposed to saying we know some things about a medication, but maybe we don't know the date time. So they're the kind of four scenarios we're looking at. We're super confident on everything but this first one for meds. We've got the other ones, I think, relatively solved and harmonized with international. It's the how do we actually say where someone's filled out a checklist of I've asked the patient, they've gone, no, I'm not on any medication. And that's actually stored in their system. How do we enable that to be shared with another system? That's kind of what we're looking at. If that helps kind of,
You're
I
not
guess, your
sharing
picture.
accurately.
Mm. Well, I guess to a degree from an interoperability spec, it's
It
accurately for
doesn't
whatever
help
that
the
source
safety
system
and the
has,
safety
because we
has to
can't
be
enhance
paramount.
it further.
But medications is not the whole picture. Anything by mouth, by however it's given, can have an effect, whether it's swallowed, whatever. Um, so it can be misleading because people will focus in on medications, they forget all the other things that are important. So your accuracy is out because you're using one word to cover a whole lot of things that a lot of people don't include because of their training. You've got to consider the actual people that are putting the data in. And a lot of them don't think about this. And I've had that experience, 59 years with a chronic illness and also as a retired GP. And I can see where the troubles occur. And this is an issue because of the way that clinicians think or don't think. And that has to be taken into consideration because your data is only as good as what the physician or the health professional puts in. And so you garbage in,
Absolutely.
garbage out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess to a degree, well, I don't want to go on record saying that. It's going to go. Well, our spec isn't about what comes in. Our spec is there's something in the system. How do I share whatever that is with someone else? I think that's kind of where because where there's a bit of sometimes discomfort, I think.
But it
Uh,
has to be patient-centered. If the clinician only focuses in on medications, that is not patient-centered. So you're transmitting data which is not accurate or could be inaccurate and could lead to interactions and other problems. So, I mean, it's really like saying no medications, no supplements, no OTC, and ordinary diet or something.
Yeah, so there are probably extra codes that may need to be added into the terminology. At the moment, that is obviously a gap when you're talking about these sorts of concerns. Um, and then the systems need to change to be able to capture those new concepts. Then, but that again will be where you can make an influence on the CDG. The CDG and this AU models is really starting to say, "No, these are concepts that we need to be capturing for patient safety and patient-centered care." And at that point, then the systems can say, okay, this is what the AUCDI says we need to be capturing. We need to improve our data capture screens and the like, and have that stored in the system. And then that's where I guess we come in as the interoperability specification is to be able to ensure that we're able to carry that information using the appropriate SNOMED codes based on the appropriate data structures that have already been stored in these systems and captured through user interfaces based on
but
agreed ways of actually describing that at a CDI level.
to that
I
point,
wonder.
what I've popped in the minutes, and that might be appropriate, is to capture that what one of the conversation topics out of this is that a finer grained set of categories on the kinds of things around like no known that I'm hearing from Tony, and I think Pip has also contributed in the chat, that we can capture those and feed in a backlog item into the clinical design group to us to kind of advocate for a workshop with the clinical design group to go through and work out what are the kinds of things that they could and capture so that we can like trigger that.
And your
I
examples
wonder
are
if I
good,
could just,
Tony, around, the OTCs and all those sorts of things. They're the sorts of levels of concepts that need to be raised in that forum so that then people like Matt can actually go and advocate for them at the SNOMED level, etc.
I
Now,
think
I know Brendan's put his hand up, but I think there's someone else. Was that, sorry, who was that?
It's Pip.
it's Pip. It's Pip.
Okay,
I
go
just
Pip.
wanted to round off the conversation just to highlight that Tony's just raised that important point. Sometimes we're digitising the status quo. Sometimes, these conversations are opportunities for improvement.
Yep.
And I guess I'm curious about if there are good examples in other jurisdictions around food and OTC and so forth.
We've looked.
I mean, and this is part of what I'm actually raising here, is that it was actually modeled very poorly internationally already. It was only because, people within CSIRO or a digital agency or whatever had raised this back in 2018, said that's not appropriate. We created a new one, and we've sort of, okay, we've got a disconnect
So
now.
why don't we just go to Brendan and then you can talk through out of the conversations of this group, some changes have happened internationally, and Heath's going to talk about what those modeled changes have happened internationally, and so that we can revisit the early conversation we had with what were just frankly awful international codes, but they're better now, so we need to look at them again. So we'll go to Brendan and then we'll jump into what's changed since we initially looked at this. But please speak, Brendan.
Yeah, it's a short question, but not probably a quick answer. In relation to what Tony was saying, do we actually have a modelling in SNOMED or anywhere else of medication to supplement or medication to nutrition conflicts? Like, how would we do that programmatically? I think that's going to need a fair amount of work to get through that.
Matt, did you want to speak to that one? Matt, by the way, is a terminologist that works on the National Clinical Terminology System.
sorry, what was that? I just had a message come through. I got distracted.
So by interpretive dance, you have to show us how the mapping between the medication code, the nutrition code, and any conflicts in supplements or nutrition. How do we even model that? Are there codes in SNOMED today that would allow us to do that? I don't think there are.
I'm not sure if there is, but I'd assume that sometimes, and I think that comes back to what people's interpretation of a medication is, and that gets back to where community clinicians might naturally assume that over-the-counters and supplements and things is in that basket, but then hospital clinicians have a different perspective. And I think Pip said before about whether or not we're capturing the status quo or trying to improve it, because at the moment, if a clinician's recording not currently taking medications, how does everyone else downstream assume that the person that writes that, they mean something, and that's currently what all the systems are doing. We're not making up anything there. But obviously from the discussion, everyone might have a different meaning of what they're saying and what they're reading for that. So I don't have any easy answer there. It's whatever's the terminology said. It's a very it's open world, and so what actually do we mean by medications? And we get this too with allergies and things like that too, where some people consider even vaccines might be medicines, but depending on what your definition of a medicine is. So yeah, I haven't got an easy answer for you there. I think we need to just think about what we actually want to capture.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there is an easy answer, but I think it's worth exploring. But I don't think we're going to do it at the point of admission to each stage of the healthcare system at this point, where we're just trying to log what was known at the time when they entered this particular stage of a health interaction. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you want to explicitly capture whether they were on supplements and vitamins, the system would have to have fields to sort of prompt the user to say, and these things that we're interested in as well. and then you've got a usability issue. But that's, I think, as Danielle said, something for the CDG to decide of how much of this we want to put into the standards.
Well, I think that's the place we kick it to. We've had some really good feedback around the need for um, working on and enhancing the capability to actually capture finer grained information. And this is about clinical information system requirements. Our job in the fire space is about interoperability, and so we need to provide what we've identified back to the clinical design group, so that can go through things like the peak bodies and the workshops and all that kind of thing, and have the right people in the room to talk about from a clinical perspective, and also include from a consumer perspective in those meetings. What are the right things that we need to be able to be capturing? And then that would feed back into this group for us to go, okay, so here are the kinds of things that have been agreed by those stakeholders as being like the things we need. And we will work out how systems can share it, if that makes sense. So we kind of round trip it.
Yep.
Okay, so I think we're back to what's changed since we last talked about this. And I am really pleased we went through that journey again because this kind of stuff is non-trivial and we should be spending time on making sure that we are clear on what we're doing. So let's go through what's changed since we first agreed on how to do it, and then International has made themselves.
Yeah, let me just reiterate what we actually agreed as well. So I've gone back a couple of slides, given that there's a few people on the call that don't have that context. So what we agreed was that we would use the medication statement resource with a code of known current medicines, which is an Australian only code, not an international code. And we would store the effective date time at the which was when the statement was current. So that's basically determining the currency, the date of the currency of the statement, and setting a status. And then we said we would not use this code in the medication request or medication resources. And we should not use the empty reason flag on the medication section to represent this concept. As I started to say, this was what the known medications used to be. It used to have a finding context of unknown, and now this has been updated to have a finding context of known, which better reflects the concept that we are actually trying to convey. And that is being reactivated literally this month. So it's been confirmed to me that this code will now be available back in Australia as of the 31st of February, which is my understanding when the releases come out the last day of the month. Obviously, the 31st of February is not 31st, but it's the 28th. But anyway, this month. It's not that, so if you go into Shrimp at the moment, you won't find it, or you will see that it's inactive. But at the end of the month or on the 1st of March, you will. And I understand, and Matt can confirm, that the current Australian concept of known current medication has been remodeled also to actually inherit from the known medicines. And the main difference there is that we have constrained the temporal context from current or specified to only current. So that's the changes that have occurred since. So there was a very similar card that was raised against AU Core to basically make sure that it is aligned with the same guidance as what we were working through in Patient Summary. And at the time of the ballot reconciliation, it was considered for future use because we really wanted it to be sorted out in IPS first and AU PS before we actually did anything in core. Now that we thought we'd sorted it out, we talked about it yesterday. and put forward a proposal there that with the new knowledge, it would effectively be exactly the same, but instead of using the Australian only code, we would use the international code of no known medicines. And we would support the idea of the temporal context of specified by using an effective period so we can actually explicitly state start and end. We know that there was no known current medications there, or represent the idea of currency by using a specific date and time point. So at that point in time, this was known as no known current medications. The other details was the same, but we basically put this to a straw man vote just to see if there was support for this proposal. But what the TDG wanted to do was refer it back here because this is where we really raised the ticket from in core, was actually this group as a result of this discussion. So they wanted to bring it back here, and hence why we're talking about it today. There you go.
I wanted to provide further context. We already decided on a pathway for patient summary. That means it's in the spec, like it's agreed, it's already in there. The thing that is currently in what is out for ballot for working standards says use the Australian specific code. That was the best solution at the time because the international code modeling was not appropriate. The international code modeling is now, we think, appropriate. So that's to a degree why this has been raised today. The other reason we've brought this through, and I realize I think we've only got 11 minutes till this meeting ends. And I appreciate Eliza has joined us because one of the decisions that was made in the patient summary call under discussion with IPS and has also been made in AU base was about the appropriateness of the resource type you use to do this. And it is a significant, I guess, impost for people moving from like a US core implementation to AU PS. What we want to call out there is there are maybe 3 resources, right? There's medication statement, medication request, and medication. There's no disagreement at all that you cannot use just medication resource because it has no linking to a patient to say things like this patient isn't taking meds. You can't do that. So you need to use one of the other contextual resources to do it. US core doesn't have a medication statement profile. It's trying to say everything you can say about medications with medication request. There's a proportion of the community that loves that. There's a proportion of the community that thinks that's a complete misuse and how dare it. So when coming into patient summary, the agreement we originally made is that you shall not use medication request or medication to express an exchange between your system and another that my patient isn't currently taking meds. So you have to use medication statement for it. But we had a question that came up in AU Core today, and we said we would talk about it, yesterday. We would talk about it today since we're talking about this, to raise it here. Sorry, that was a really wordy introduction. Eliza, did you want to provide some context for some of your concerns?
Yeah, I've had more time obviously to think about it and listening to more of this information. I think part of the reason why I debated about my negative vote yesterday. We're not a clinician's first point of call in terms of where they enter the data. Our solution is a health information exchange. All of our information comes from other systems, and we're pulling that together. I raised it because I know quite a lot of our sites don't typically default to sending things like medication statements. They would have more like medication requests information. And we do have quite a few US sites. And my concern was if we did have no known medications information, we would potentially have to manufacture a medication statement to be able to communicate that information. And at least from my perspective, for the types of solutions we have that we support health information exchanges, it really starts to border into sort of interpretation of information that I've been trained to stay far away from because it, it's it's not involved with a clinician per se. So that's primarily why I've raised it, but I also understand. I agree, medication statement is the most logical place for that information and the code and the whole no known, all of that, 100% on board with aligning what it means so that all technical systems are speaking the same language. I guess my point was I feel like if we know there's no known medications, but it's not actually in the medication statement, it hasn't come through in a medication statement, what we're supposed to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm completely understand where you're coming from, and I'm very pragmatic when it comes to this sort of integration stuff as well. But I think that the benefit of these clear statements, these clear requirements, is that you now have it as a tool to actually say, well, actually, this is how it should be done, vendor. Now, if you can't do that, then I will be forced to do that on behalf of your customer to be able to turn that into something that is compliant with core or IPS, etc. And your point about the doctor is clear, but is again important. But again, this is you're actually better reflecting it from the doctor's perspective technically because you're actually because of these discussions that we're having. So I think you've got the support of this community to actually say, well, that's what I have to do because everyone's basically agreed that this is what needs to be done. So it kind of takes
Yeah,
it out of your hands. So yeah, hopefully you're
wonderful.
feeling a little bit of comfortable
Yeah,
about that. I mean,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. Especially since I've had a bit more time to reflect on how we would potentially be receiving that data
yeah.
and where it would live.
And
Um,
then there's only one way to do it, right? And that's the
yes.
problem with these sorts of interoperability specs is that there are, at the moment, in this particular
Mm,
case, three ways you can do it. And what we're
yep.
basically saying in Australia is, no, there's one. All
Yep.
right. If
Yep.
you're going to convey this concept, this is how you do it. And
Yep.
um, although there's a couple of, I think, little bits there that are probably in the should space, but we're certainly setting a stake in the ground to improve
Mm,
the situation.
yep. Now I just have to make sure all the other international regions we lean on them and go, look, they've thought about
Well,
this for a really
and we're
long
working
time.
on that. We're working on
Good,
that
thank
as well.
you.
Yeah.
We are,
So we've
yes,
actually
as
had
well.
pharmacy and everyone actually start to look at this, and they're making changes in R6.
Hmm.
And we hope that we'll have some changes in IPS, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
as Daniel said before, we're actually changing the world here. So um, this group right here is changing the world.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Yep.
we're amazing.
Much, much better now. If I had a chance to revote, I'd change it. So
So
Well, that being
funny,
said,
funny I should say.
okay, here's our point of order. We're not going to make an official decision today. We don't have time. We've got 4 minutes left. We'd already made a decision. There's a point of order here under HL7 AU and HL7 International that if we want to change our mind, we need to vote to revisit. And essentially, what's being presented is that there's enough changes in the information terminology and modeling to revisit our initial decision, which said use the Australian code, to consider using the international code, which brings us into full alignment with IPS, now that that modeling has been done. So what we need to do to preempt that decision is to vote to revisit. in that process, and we've never seen it with patient summary before, if we've already voted on something and there's a reason enough has changed in the environment or some external drivers, we can come back and go, look, things have changed. I'm going to present to you reasons why we need to look at changing our mind. We do a revisit. I'm going to put out to vote. I'll ask for a motion in a second because that was what's on the agenda today is revisiting our original decision based on what Heath has presented. One of the criteria is instead of majority, we need 60% of people to say there's enough here that we should be further discussing and revisiting that decision for us to reopen it. So unless there are any other comments or questions at this point, I'm going to ask for someone to motion to revisit FHIR 52274.
Well, I've got on the screen that I'll motion it. So there's your motion.
Okay. Heath has motioned. Who's happy to second
I'll,
revisiting FHIR 52274?
I'm happy to second Landon Riley.
Okay, thank you, Landon. Any other comments or questions? Not hearing any. I've launched the current motion. This is just a motion for revisit. We will not make any actual changes out of the revisit. It's just a, is this worth talking about again? So please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain. Okay, we've got 50% of people voting. If you haven't, again, you can pop things in the chat or say your name and vote. All right, we've got 60% of people who have voted, still waiting for more people to contribute to whether or not, based on what's been presented, this is worth us revisiting our original decision. Okay, we need way more people to vote. Only 65% of people have voted. I can track you. We're waiting on you.
just reiterate, we're just revisiting. We may not even make a change, but we're just going to basically revisit and talk about it even more than we have today.
Or maybe the same discussion, but yeah. All right, we've got 80%, still just a couple more holdouts. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain on if you would be happy for this group to consider making a change or keeping it the same. All right, I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to end that poll. I am going to share the results. We have 22 affirmative, 0 negative, 3 abstains. So the motion carries. We have approval to revisit this topic. So we will bring this back. And probably the proposal will look very, very similar to what we've just walked through. Now, we're out of time. So, Heath, can you zoom to the end, please? Because there's no point me sharing, just right to the end. Let's talk about next. Okay, that's
Oopsie.
a bit too far. Okay, I'll share. I'm just going to talk about the agenda for our next call. Yeah, if you just click through and just go to next one, just one more. There it is. Next call, 6th of March. Here's what's on it. I will actually walk through the request for feedback in QA.html we didn't have. Likely we will actually bring this topic with more notice now that we have approval to revisit to actually decide what changes, if any, we will make in AU patient summary. There'll be a talk about the Connectathon that we didn't have. Are there any other items that people want to raise to ballot? Sorry, not to ballot, sorry. Raise in to add to our next call.
I might just basically say that will be a Connectathon kickoff meeting on the 2nd of March, which is before our next meeting. So just to put it out there that we will be talking about Connectathon and patient care track. And if there's any hot topics for the breakout, please go to the Zulip.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you all for your time today. Again, as always, that's been amazing feedback, and we'll bring it through to the next call and see if we can land on a solid position we would like to change. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Thanks, Danielle.
Okay.